The Great Lakes, some excellent sailing from the turmoil of Lake Erie to the beauty of Tobermory in the North Channel. The biggest freshwater sailboat race in the whole world, the Chicago to Mac, hauling out for the winter in storms that make most ocean sailors agree the Great Lakes can be a much, much more dangerous place than anywhere else. This week, we set out to find the perfect Great Lakes sailboat. Let's start with some prerequisites. I know all too well how much of a bear weather can be on the lakes. When you get 15-foot waves on the Atlantic Ocean, it sounds scary, but they're 60 feet apart, so the boat kind of just goes up and then comes back down. When you get 15-footers on the lakes, they're sometimes less than 40 feet apart, and usually breaking whitecaps. They're violent and pointy and extremely steep. Storms race in out of the west. You see some black clouds on the horizon, and within an hour they're on you. And with the major lakes long and skinny running west to east, the waves build up over time, and sailing at the halfway point or further down the lakes means very, very big seas. So we'll have to contend with that on our new boat, but also the winter problem. We can have the boat in the water usually from mid-April to late October, so for at least 5 months she'll be on the hard. And before we go boat shopping, we'll need to make a decision about the mast. Here's the conundrum. Most winter facilities require you to drop the mast for storage. Some don't, but they're kind of rare. So if we buy a boat with an uber complicated rig, like say this Hunter 36 in Wisconsin, which we'll see here stored with the mast up, we won't want to take the mast down. And let me explain. This is a B&R rig with a lot going on, not just the cap shrouds that every rig has, but also these crisscrossing shrouds in between the spreaders. A complicated rig that's not only hard to take down, but even harder to retune every year when we put it back up. If we buy a boat with a complicated rig like this, we'll want to make sure that we store it for the winter in one of the more rare boat yards that allows storage with the mast up, which means we've pigeonholed ourselves into only storing in a small minority of the boatyards every year. Some folks do this, and it's totally possible, but food for thought. It would be easier to buy a much simpler rig like, say, this Catalina 34 with its single spreader, uber simple masthead sloop rig. Super easy to put back up and easy to get it tuned with a loose gauge in just a few minutes. Our next issue is going to be draft. I sail primarily on the shallowest part of the Great Lakes, Lake St. Clair, which is basically a 25-mile wide puddle in between Huron and Erie. That's an average of 11 feet deep, but a 6-foot draft here is totally fine. And throughout the Great Lakes, 6 foot is a totally manageable keel. The Great Lakes use the lateral buoy system and are very well marked and extremely navigable. I wouldn't go over 6 feet unless I didn't mind that limitation. And keel design matters here too. There's a lot of racing here, club racing every night of the week, which I partake in often. You'll have to decide if you want a fast boat or not based on what you'll be doing, but more importantly, you'll have to decide how heavy that keel should be. My 35-footer with 14,000 pounds of weight is actually a fairly large boat here. Most folks are very happy with 26-footers, weighing less than 10 or even 8,000 pounds. In fact, the most common boat on the Great Lakes is likely a 26-footer, just big enough to weekend on or take up to the North Channel for a few weeks, but small enough to be extremely cheap to own. But the limitations of smaller boats are pretty fierce. We only get 6 months on the water, and weather is going to be a constant problem. If you buy a lighter boat like that shouldn't be out in anything over, say, 20 knots of wind, you further limit your time on the water down from 6 months to even worse. So there's good reason to buy a heavy boat here. All that in mind, let's go shopping. The first and likely right answer for 75% of people looking for a Great Lakes boat is to buy an 80s boat that's in good shape, like this Tartan. This is a 34. For anything from 30 to 40 feet will do here, and this one's $100,000, but 80s boats can be had in varying condition, anywhere from 10 grand on up. This Tartan has a Yanmar, it's a simple sloop rig, it's plenty heavy and capable enough for the Great Lakes, and still sporty enough to race around the marks on a Thursday night if you want to. She's got a full complement of sails and even comes with 4 different spinnakers, which usually means she was raced, but looking at the pictures, you can't really tell. She comes with a cradle, as most Great Lakes boats do, because you'll need somewhere to store it for the winter. She's 11,000 pounds of well-made sailing fun. But of course, she's an 80s boat, and like all boats, we're going to be looking for soft spots in the deck, any signs of issues with the keel bolts or keel to hull joinery, and rusty rigging. It's not uncommon to find 40-plus-year-old rigging here on the lakes because the lack of salt water means our rigging really does last that long. A 34-foot tartan has a very common rig size, so even used sails will be very easy to find, and the slip sizes in the marinas up here will easily accommodate a 34-foot boat. This boat would be a very cheap and easy to own boat. I know a lot of people say that boat stands for bring out another 1,000. Sailboat ownership doesn't have to be like that. If you're good with owning a depth sounder and a tablet for navigation, there really isn't much you need to spend up here on the Great Lakes for equipment. My all-in costs year-round, including haul-out and storage and spraying the boat off when it comes out of the water, everything all in is less than $5,000. Some years, less than $3,000, and that's Canadian dollars. In green money, that would be less than $2,000 a year to own a 35-footer. So what if an 80s boat doesn't fit you right? You want some more modern amenities. Well, 42-foot Beneteaus aren't all that common up here, but you can have a sugar scoop and something of an aft cabin if you want it. Take this Catalina that we mentioned before, a 34-footer with a scoop and a walk-through transom. Shallow draft keel, beautifully large cockpit, and an interior you could spend weeks in on a trip up to the North Channel. These boats are vast and roomy and easy to live with, and plenty of boat for what the Great Lakes have to offer, and even come with an aft cabin, or more of an aft bed anyway. Catalina is a great boat too because the owners group is so active. This one sports the universal diesel engine because in all their boats over the decades, the one fault I can find with Catalina is not partnering with Yanmar sooner. But this universal can have a long and happy life all the same. A nice boat for $60,000. For a little more boat, one of the best boats for the Great Lakes is the Legend. You guys know I love a Legend. The 40.5 is not Granddad's Hunter with a B&R rig. She's got a backstay and a proper fractional rig. She's fast and racy and lively, a nice boat to push to her limit, and also sports full accommodations like we've come to expect from newer boats. They want $100,000 for this one, but the 40.5 often goes for much less cash, sometimes as low as $60,000. So that's what I'd be looking for if I wanted this boat, which I kind of do. Shallow draft and racy, plenty big enough to get out on Lake Erie and over 20 knots of breeze. This one would be one contender for me for sure. Let me end this by telling you what the most common boats are up here. 40-foot Hunters and Beneteaus being super common, of course. If you want a solid boat, though, above all else, everyone up here loves a CS-36. These big keel battleships are primed for the Great Lakes sailing, and you'll find at least one in every major marina, right beside what seems to be their natural sister ship, the Endeavour 37, which is also super common. And both of these boats could be had for $50,000 or less, and both have very long service lives up here on fresh water. The next size down, people buy a C&C 30, or really any C&C. They're fast, they're race-friendly, and they're well-made, provided we check for soft decks, keel to hull joinery, and decent rigging. At any marina anywhere up here, the second most popular boat after Hunter is going to be C&C. Look for that telltale white pinstripe with the pointy end, and you'll have found another C&C. I want to take a second to thank the people who make these videos possible, the team of people on Patreon who give as little as a couple of bucks an episode to make these videos possible. The mission here at Lady K Sailing has always been to get more people sailing more easily, and I couldn't do it without you. If you'd like to help support that mission, please consider becoming a patron. I love you guys. Until next week, keep the heavy side down, but not too far down. We'll see ya.